What's going on, everybody? This is Cody, the home theater hobbyist. Over the past few weeks, I've been here in my theater, basically playing in the sandbox, trying to optimize my sound for my updated seating configuration. If you've been following the channel, you know that last year I upgraded my speakers. I went from the Klipsch Reference Premier line to the Arendal Sound 1723S line. Right there behind me is the Surround S. I also have the Center S, Monitor S, and the 1723 2V subwoofer. I purchased a 5.1 setup from Arendal Sound. I like it, but I also upgraded my seating. I now have the Tuscany Ultimate Luxury Edition from Valencia Theater Seating, and that meant that I had to move my original Tuscanys to right here. You see them right here. And I've put them on a riser, so now it's even more movie theater like in this room. It's truly awesome. I'm blessed. I thank God for this setup. But I have to optimize it sonically, okay? And so one of the things I want to do and I want to talk about in this video is once you purchase new speakers, do you need to tonally match them to your existing overhead speakers? You can see I've got the Energy Classics right up there, and those were and are my Atmos speakers, but they don't tonally match the Arendal Sound, my bed layer. So I want to talk about that in this video. But this is the first of several videos that I will do over the next several months where I talk about actually making all of this work. Adding a second row changes things sonically. My front row sounds great. Back row, not so great. So I've got to add speakers. I'm probably going to do some more room treatment. I'm going to talk about speaker setup and just optimize everything. So if that is of any interest to you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you can be alerted as I publish new videos. So let's move on. Let's talk about tonally matching your Atmos speakers and your floor level speakers. So I got to start by giving you guys just a little bit of background to understand exactly how I ended up really kind of curious about tonally matched Hythe speakers. Back in 2016, I owned these, the Energy Classics. I owned a 5.1 setup of these particular speakers, but we moved into a bigger house and I got a bigger room, so I wanted bigger speakers, and I always wanted Klipsch, so I decided to buy the Reference Premier line from that year. And so I purchased 7 speakers. I had a 7-channel layout, 2 pairs of the RP151 bookshelf speakers, an RP440C center channel, and a pair of the RP260F floor standing speakers as my left and right. But I didn't purchase any Atmos speakers because at the time Atmos was pretty new and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in my room. I really didn't want to cut holes in my ceilings, and really the way this room is set up, the ceiling right here kind of goes at this angle, so there's not a whole lot of room, you know, just in front of my seating position. So I decided I wanted to mount speakers on the wall, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had my Energy Classics, so I decided to mount them on each side of my wall, and it actually worked. Now, when you're listening to different movies that have Hythe effects, the main thing you're listening to is sound effects. And I was basically running a 7.1.2 configuration because I had the 2 Hythe speakers. Now, one thing that was a little bit lacking in that particular setup was if you had something that was happening in the Hythe plane from the front of the room to the back of the room, I only had speakers in the middle, which is basically where my seating position was. So I didn't get the front to back Hythe that most people were getting if they had 4 Atmos or Hythe speakers. I was getting something that was a little bit different. Basically, I was getting an arc. The sound would start in my front speakers and it would arc up to my middle speakers and then back down, for instance, because it's Atmos and it's object based, so it just uses the speakers that you have. So it would kind of do this sort of thing. And since I was sitting here in the middle, it actually would work. I didn't have any real issues with it working, but it wasn't quite right. And I was also wondering if I was kind of missing anything tonally because I was using Energy Classic speakers versus using the Klipsch speakers. But these were pretty close to how Klipsch speakers sound. But now that I've upgraded to the Arendal Sound 1723S and I noticed that these sound different from my Energy Classics and my Klipsch speakers, then I really wanted to know, hey, do I need to tonally match my Hythe speakers to my floor speakers? And that kind of led me down this particular path. So let's talk for a minute about how these speakers sound different, okay? First of all, the Klipsch, the RP150Ms, they're a little bit on the bright end and they're actually pretty dynamic with not as much mid-range. So they got some decent high-end, they got some decent bass, and in the mid-range, it's just a little bit subdued. Whereas the Energy Classics, a bit bright in the high end, decent mid-range, and it basically has no bass. I have to cross these over at like 110, 120 hertz because there's no bass here. And then the Arendal Sound 1723S line is much more neutral and balanced with all of the different sounds. So I'm going to play a quick audio sample so you can hear the difference between these three speakers.
Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number. Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number. Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number.
Okay, so hopefully you heard those audio samples, and honestly the main thing you probably noticed was the Energy Take Classics lack in bass compared to the other two speakers, but you could probably tell a difference between the speakers. So to do this test, I needed to purchase some more Arendal speakers. So I purchased these. I purchased the Arendal Sound 1961 Height modules. And I purchased these particular modules for a couple of reasons. The first reason was cost. The 1961 Height module is $7.99 as I record this, whereas the 1723S module is $15.99 as I record this. So basically I could get two pairs of these for just a single pair of the 1723S. So that pretty much made the decision for me. But also I did just kind of reach out to Arendal Sound and ask them, how close tonally are the 1961 Height to the 1723S? And they said it's pretty close. So I was like, yeah, I should be safe going with the 1961. So I bought a single pair of these to do for this particular test. Now I'm going to quickly play an audio sample so you can hear the difference between the 1961s and the Energy Take Classics.
Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number. Like two magnets, we are drawn to each other. You just know how to push all my buttons. Moved out of town and I erased your number.
Now, to determine if I need to tonally match my height speakers to my floor level speakers, I didn't really want to mount all the speakers on the wall because that would be a little bit too time consuming. So I decided to build a makeshift speaker stand that is really tall. I got a post from the local hardware store along with some scrap wood I had around the house, and I made a post that's just over 7 feet tall. And I basically put this speaker and this speaker on the post in the Atmos position forward of my listening position, and I left my Energy Take Classics mounted on the wall, so I had forward and aft speakers for a 5.1.4 configuration here in my room. To test this out, I used several different movies, including Midway, Ford versus Ferrari, No Time to Die, the latest James Bond movie, Kong Skull Island, Jurassic Park, and I think one or two other movies. But I used actually several different movies to really kind of confirm what I was hearing. But what I did, and I'm going to use Midway as sort of my main test case because there's a lot of Atmos effects in that movie. If you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. It's about the Battle of Midway during World War II between the Americans and the Japanese. There's a lot of planes flying overhead, bullets whizzing over your head. So it's got a lot of just overhead effects. So I definitely recommend that movie. But in the first configuration, what I did was I was running the 1723s as my base layer with the Energy Take Classics, all four of them up above, so front and back. And I was watching the movies, and what I noticed was that with all the movies, I could slightly tell that the heights were just a little bit brighter than the ground level, especially when things were moving front to back or something like that. I could tell that it was just a little bit brighter than the base level. But next, I moved on to using the 1961s as the fronts and the Energy Take Classics as my rears. And I could tell that with the 1961s, they definitely had a better tonal match to the 1723s. Things weren't as bright, and they were just a bit more neutral. And when things moved from back to front or front to back, I could tell that there was a difference in the speaker tone between the two. So what did that test tell me? Honestly, the main thing I learned was that you need to make sure that you tonally match your Atmos speakers to one another. So if you're going to go 2, 4, 6, 22, whatever number you're going to do, make sure they tonally match so you get a nice configuration overhead. Now, if they tonally match your ground level speakers, that's great and an added bonus, but it's not key. And I say that because, quite frankly, when you start talking about Atmos effects, they're really just sound effects. There's not a whole lot of voices up there necessarily that are moving from the top to the floor. It's mainly just sound effects. Rain, helicopters, planes, gunshots, explosions, stuff like that. So they're just sort of filling things out. They don't necessarily need to tonally match your ground level. It's nice when they do, and I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do it. If you want to tonally match your ground level speakers, absolutely go ahead. But the main thing is to make sure that you tonally match your Atmos speakers to one another, because when you don't do that, that's when you notice the biggest difference. That's when I notice the biggest difference. So that's what I learned. Hopefully you got something out of this. If you did, definitely hit us up with a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, because I will be doing more videos like this, just like I said earlier, as I continue to learn different things about my theater, as I've added this second row and stuff like that. So thank you guys for watching. If you want to purchase anything, use those links because it does help support the channel. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next time.